Good evening, everyone. My name is Henry Hamilton III. I'm the chair-elect of the American Bar Association General Practice and Solo and Small Firm Division, otherwise known as GPSolo. And our motto here is "Your success is our mission." We're a group of about 24,000 members, and at our core, we are about improving the administration of justice and ensuring that our members, the American solo and small firm attorney, is more efficient, more successful, and more profitable. And we welcome you to today's latest program in our General Practice Solo and Small Firm Program Activate Diversity Series. And of course, before I do anything, I want to thank our amazing diversity director, Kelly Adams, for assisting with this series and these programs. We just could not have done this without her over the years. Today's topic is Activate Diversity, defining diversity in 2023, and it's going to be an exciting presentation. I'm looking forward to it. So much of what we do in the law is a search for truth, understanding, and justice. And if those are our aims, we just cannot fulfill those goals without diversity. But that's enough for me. I now want to turn this exciting program, this exciting evening, over to Jamie Boston, who is a special advisor to our diversity board and also one of our directors. Jamie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair-elect. I appreciate it, and welcome everybody. I hope this is going to be actually, I know it's going to be a great program. I want to start by just kind of doing some housekeeping things to start. We're scheduled for roughly an hour. I know people are busy, particularly summertime and so forth, so the core of the program will be about an hour, but if we need more time to ask questions or dive into something a little deeper, we do have that available. But we completely understand that some of you have to leave at the 1 hour mark. I also want to encourage all of you to listen and engage, ask questions, and this is going to be an open space type talk. All right, let's kind of make this like Vegas. You know, what stays in Vegas, what goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas. Although I must note this is being recorded, but still, nevertheless, let's come with open minds, more importantly, open hearts as we have this discussion. It could be difficult for some of you, maybe not. I'm just supposing that. But let's make sure we hear one another and we talk to one another. That's the whole point of this presentation. I will start by introducing, just briefly, you guys have it, I think, in a link, or the link's about to be sent to you, who are our guests of honor is today. And today's a little different from our other panel presentation or other presentations. We're not doing the panel format. We're just going to have a conversation today. And so that conversation is with the one and only Jocelyn M. Armstrong. Ms. Armstrong is the Director of Inclusion and Outreach at the Ohio Bar Association. She leads programming and integration of inclusion, diversity, and equity in association culture. And she's committed to advancing diversity and inclusion in the legal profession and bar community. I'm going to keep it there because we're on a short program, but you can read her outstanding bio. I'll throw in there, she did work for a congressional office at one point in time before becoming a lawyer. And she has a host of awards she's won for what she's done both in the community and in school. So with that said, let's go ahead and just dive into it. Now, as I said, I want to engage the audience here. And so the first thing I want you all to do, I want you to take 1 minute. If you get a second, pull a piece of paper or put it on your iPad or whatever you might have in front of you, and just write down, what does diversity mean to you? All right, I'm going to give you 1 minute. Another 30 seconds. Okay, it's roughly a minute. So if you want, you can share it in the chat. We have somebody that's going to be monitoring the chat for us. So if you want to throw in there now, what do you think diversity is or what diversity means to you, please share with us. And we're going to come back and hopefully you learned something. I know you will actually, because she's outstanding. But more importantly, I want to see if you have that same viewpoint when we're done with this presentation. Okay, so I asked everybody else to define what diversity is, but I'm going to start with Ms. Armstrong. Ms. Armstrong, please, can you define diversity as a specialist in this area?
I am happy to do that, Jamie. I also want to say good evening to everyone and thank you all so much for having me. It is my great joy to be here with the GPSolo Small Division of the American Bar Association. I, of course, bring you greetings from the Ohio State Bar Association in Columbus. I thought it important that I participate in the minute-long exercise as well. And so I wrote on my paper that diversity to me means unique or it means different. And different is neither good nor bad, it's just different. Because I am a word nerd or a logophile, as I call myself, I also pulled some what I'll call official dictionaries from places like the Oxford Dictionary or the Cambridge Dictionary. So when we think about diversity, I know sometimes people hear it and it starts to make them a little uncomfortable and nervous, but it's actually a good word. And it means things like the state of being diverse or variety. The Cambridge Dictionary describes it as the fact of many different types of things or people being included in something, or a range of different things or people. So I want us to kind of keep that in mind when diversity just means different, not good or bad. It means variety. It means unique. And all of us come to the space and to whatever table that we sit at as a unique individual.
Okay. And let's just jump to it. So what? Like, does it matter? Why does diversity matter? Why are we even having this presentation? Why do you have the job that you have discussing this?
So diversity matters on a couple of different fronts. When we talk about building solutions, for instance, and we always like to have, I think, different ideas and different approaches because we know when we consider problem solving, the more opinions and the more input and the lived experiences that we have around the solutions building table, the more likely we are to come up with a solution that is successful. We look at the Harvard Business Review, for instance. They did a report based on a study a number of years ago, and they have repeatedly been quoted that when there are more diverse teams, an organization is more successful. They definitely, with it being the Harvard Business Review, we're talking about it in the business space. And so more diverse teams have a positive impact on the bottom line. And again, that goes back to being able to have diverse opinions, diverse lived experiences, diverse skill sets around the table in order to make sure that you're getting the best of all the solutions that you can have.
So let's talk about something. And again, I want this to be an open discussion. I want to share with you call it coincidence, call it divine intervention, whatever you want. But I recently had a discussion with a very good friend of mine, love him dearly. And just to give you a little background, he's very high up in the business world, I'll just say. Has done quite well for himself because he's a hard worker. And then that's clear, even when you meet him, how he's achieved the place he has, worked for a very big company. And one of the things he said to me, and he's one of the leaders of this company organization, he said, Jamie, he said, the first thing he said, and this is why I want to talk about comfort. He said, I just want to be transparent with you. We have a lot of training on diversity. And he said, you know me, and I think I do. And he said, I'll be honest, not that I don't disagree with it, don't like it, but he was honest and said he kind of didn't understand it, right? And so it started a very open discussion that we had. And funny enough, I had just found out that same day that I was doing moderating this panel. So I forgot to even tell him about that. But anyway, we had this lengthy conversation. And since you're just saying, it's like, look, I do want people to have pieces of the pie. I do want to have different opinions coming to the table and so forth. But I still don't really get why are we kind of being forced or why there's so much of this training. And so I just want to know kind of what your perspective on that. What would you say to him if you were talking to him, and how do you train your people?
So I like to remind people that we live in a world where everyone wasn't always allowed in certain spaces. right? When we look at just our profession, for instance, there was a time when the only people who were lawyers were white men, and typically of a certain age. And that kind of is still reflected now. There was when women were starting to take the bar exam and they were passing the bar exam, there were some women who had to actually sue their state in order to be admitted to practice. It's a very plain fact, and it's even listed on the ABA website that the ABA did not accept Black people as members. And so Black lawyers then formed the National Bar Association. So we have to think about, one, we were sitting in a space where something was not created with everyone in mind. And so now that we've made some movements forward and more people are coming into the space that are different than what was the original prototype, it requires, I should say, for us to have some learning involved in that. Also, we are a service industry. We deal with whomever, for the most part, comes in the door. Those of us that would work in the public sector as public defenders, or who work in the criminal defense space, or who are prosecutors, you literally don't know who's coming in the door on any given day. If you are maybe doing estate planning or family law, or you're a business attorney, you may have a little more predictability about your clients, but still, anyone could come and decide they need a divorce, or anyone could come and decide they need your help set up their business for their LLC. And so how are you engaging the people that you meet? What are the things that you may need to know about their cultural dynamics? What are some things that impact, for instance, women business owners different than predominantly male businesses? Those are all the things that we could benefit from learning, because it helps us better serve our clients. And then, of course, we just walk around in the world on any given day. And so when you happen to maybe encounter someone in the grocery store, and perhaps you see that they're maybe wearing a burqa or a hijab, what are your thoughts about that? Well, if you've engaged in some learning, you'll know that in many cultures that is a part of their dress, and it usually has a religious connotation because of their beliefs. And that's kind of essentially what it means. If you've not been exposed to that, though, you might have questions, you might think it's interesting, or you might think it's odd, and you might respond differently to people. But the more opportunities that we have to learn about others, the better attorneys that we can be, and the better ways that we can help shape society. Because another thing that I also know is that lawyers are leaders, and people often look to us for solutions. They look to us to help shape what's going to happen in society. They think that we are always the smartest person in the room, and so they want to know our opinions. And so again, the better versed we can be in learning some of these things, it's great. The other thing I would say too, to your colleague that you were talking to, is learning about other people and engaging with other humans is not something to be afraid of. It's definitely something that can be interesting or uncomfortable at any turn, but it's not something to be afraid of. And by taking the time to learn about someone else, it does not necessarily take anything away from you. It definitely will cost you some time, but it will enhance the way that you approach life. An example I like to use is we have bar exam twice a year, and there's always new lawyers that show up after that bar exam. And when those new lawyers show up, just because there's new lawyers does not mean now that my space as an attorney is diminished, right? It just means I have a new person to help figure some things out. So that's kind of the way we should look at other things. When there's new people that are moving into our workspaces or into our neighborhoods and communities, that doesn't diminish who we are. It just makes better opportunities for us to engage with people and help bring them along.
So let's follow that a little more. And it's, some might say it's kind of utopic, right? And what you just said, that's, we all just want to learn about one another. We just want to be friends and so forth. But let's get a little deeper. We're in the aftermath of the recent decision of Supreme Court, right? In terms of I can't remember the name of the case right now. I'm sorry. Is it Fair Students, I believe, or something along those lines? And, they made it clear that race could not be a factor in terms of college admissions. And I will admit, first, I did not read this whole opinion yet. I think it's 237 pages. Just kind of skimmed it a little bit. So I'm not an expert. So if I get something wrong in reference to this, please correct me. But where I'm going with that is, again, what you said is kind of nice and utopic, but let's talk about, we're in the job place, whether we're lawyers, business people, whatever. And I've had several people come up to me, and it's interesting, I find myself in this conversation. I don't know why people like to talk to me about these issues. But I've heard it said, and predominantly, to be clear, and I don't want to hold any punches here, predominantly by white men who are saying, things to the nature of, Jamie, I feel like I'm kind of a target now. It's tough for white men and so forth. And I just want to understand, or just want to talk about that in terms of kind of the business world, whether it's in school or education and so forth, particularly in light of this new decision. What would we say, or what do we need to say to people? Again, you're the expert here. And I think you hit it a little bit when you talk about it doesn't diminish, but what if you are that white male who's at the top of your organization and you do see things changing, and it seems to be the movement in that corporation or organization is to diversify more? And does that necessarily mean that I'm going to be out if I'm not white male, or should I be afraid on what's going to happen? What would you say to that situation?
So I would want them to take a few deep breaths first. I think we have to think about when we're trying to diversify, if you will, like a staff, right? And we're maybe moving different people into the C-suite. I would like to think that organizations were being intentional about the way that they were doing their hiring, and that they were not just hiring people because they fit a certain demographic, but they also were hiring people that maybe fit a demographic and were well-skilled. And that is more often than not the case, is that people are very well-skilled. They just fit a demographic that's missing from your space. And you have to look around and wonder, if you're looking at your organization and your C-suite only represents one sort of identity, right? Only one kind of identity, but the customer base and the other folks within your organization are a wide swath of different identities. People are going to start looking at that and say, do I want to work at this organization, or do I want to do business with this organization or purchase from this organization when I don't see someone like myself in the leadership? That's a question that people ask, and it's a fair question. And if you feel like you're afraid of losing your spot, so to speak, you have to understand the culture of your organization. And if you sat there long enough to shape the culture of your organization, you should not be afraid, right? You should be welcoming this. Because if you're doing great work and you've done great work the whole time you were there, the likelihood of you being pushed out just to bring someone in to fill a quota is very slim. And again, I'm hoping that organizations are more thoughtful about the way they're doing their hiring, because when we are just filling quotas, we're missing great opportunities. Because when we're just filling quotas, we're not creating environments that are inclusive, or that where people want to stay, because then they're maybe the only person that looks like them. They're the only woman in the C-suite, or that sort of thing. And so we have to not lean into that fear. The other thing is, for a long time, when we look around the Fortune 500 companies, when we look at major law firms, the leadership is one demographic and one identity. And we have to ask ourselves why. We have to ask ourselves why law schools are graduating classes that are 50% women. And then the higher you go up in the ranks at the firm, the fewer women you see in leadership. What are we doing at law firms that makes that thing problematic? And it's not that the women are not great lawyers. They pass the same bar exam, right? So those are the kinds of things that we have to ask ourselves. The other thing is, I think we have to consider that when we talk about diversity, it is more than just race and gender. It involves our neurological abilities. It involves our physical abilities. It taps into the different generations that we come from. So I like to tell people, if you live long enough, you might find yourself in a different category. I used to be a young lawyer.
You still are.
I'm now in a different generation, and now I fall into a protected class, right? Based on my identity, right? Or some people that they are one identity, and then life changes and now they're disabled. And now how are they approaching the practice of law? That changes. And so when we look at it just as race and gender, we miss the opportunity that at some point in our life, we will be considered, and should be at any point in our life, honestly, considered as a part of a diverse group. We also have to, again, understand that just because someone else is getting something does not necessarily mean that we're losing something.
And that's interesting. I also heard you kind of said a dirty word earlier when we talk about diversity. And what comes to my mind is sometimes it comes across when you're talking about that fear factor we discussed earlier, or just, hey, things are changing. There's almost kind of this implication that somehow that woman, that disabled person, that person of color coming in is somehow less equal, or maybe even better than the person that's currently in that spot. And I think you said something that kind of sticks home. Like if you find yourself that you're in that fear or whatever, maybe you do need to look at your own performance, right? Are you performing at the level you should? And if you are, either you're gonna have a heck of a lawsuit, right, for you getting fired because you got the numbers that show that you did that, or two, I would say maybe you can use your own leverage as a leader to help shape things so that they are being hired for the right reasons. Or three, don't just make that assumption that, hey, just because somebody's coming in, like you said, I'm going to lose my position, or that person, it's almost like you're saying that person may not be as good as you are. And in fact, they could be better. So, I would just encourage people, and this is my little 2 cents in those situations, do some self-reflection, right? And maybe that'll help you understand what's going on. Not to mention, clearly, the history of things that go on that you expressed earlier. Let's talk about, and to the audience, I apologize. I'm a Black male, so a lot of my questions probably come from that. And Ms. Armstrong, please, I do want to take the point home that diversity comes in many shapes, colors, and avenues, and so it's important for all of us to keep in mind. I'll switch gears for a minute. I actually sent something to her the other day, and this is not to get into any political issue and so forth, but I think this is appropriate given the topic of our discussion today. In terms of diversity, I came across this article, and some of you might have heard this, by Megan Rapinoe. And she was asked the question, those who don't know, I think most do, outstanding soccer player, probably the top woman, maybe athlete, soccer player there is altogether. Now she's retiring this year. I've always followed her. I thought she was a great soccer player. But she was asked a question about how she felt about transgender athletes. And those, again, who don't know her, she's openly lesbian and very outspoken about a lot of issues, but particularly in the LGBTQ plus arena. And so when they asked her, I'll just go ahead and read it. This was in Time magazine, apparently, and she had some candid thoughts. Rapinoe made it clear that she sees transgender women the same way she does any other women. So she doesn't see it as taking anything away from women's sports. All right, now, I hear you. Some of you are gonna have religious reasons why you feel differently about this, and even those who are athletes, and I completely get the strength and the muscle and all that discussion, but I'm reading this because what she said really kind of struck home with me. She said, absolutely, she says, you're taking a real woman's place. That's the part of the argument that's still extremely transphobic. I see trans women as real women. What you're saying automatically in the argument, you're sort of telling on yourself already, is you don't believe these people are women. Therefore, they're taking the other spot. I don't feel that way. And so it made me think about that. I did apply it to race. I did apply it to class and so forth, because it made me even examine some thoughts about it. I mean, as somebody that played ball, I do see the difference between men and women in sports. And again, we can go into that debate later on. But the point to take home, or the point that I'd like to, or a question I'd like to ask you, Ms. Armstrong, is like, what do you think about that? When we start talking about things that go beyond race, that go beyond just the typical female and male relationship or identities, when we get into the transgender world, that's an aspect of diversity as well. And how do we address that? I mean, because there's a lot of deep things rooted in that topic, and how do we handle that in today's changing world?
So there's a couple of things. One, I want people to always remember that regardless of someone's gender identity or sexuality, we're still talking about human beings. And I feel like in some conversations that's being lost because people don't have a full understanding. They start to somehow in their minds relegate people to a different status. We are still talking about human beings at the end of the day. That's the thing I want to lay out first. The other thing is that, to Megan Rapinoe's point, she is a part of the soccer world and has been a leader and a stellar athlete in that space. So she has probably had many conversations with her colleagues about what this means, particularly as she is nearing retirement and will probably still be very involved in the process. I will also say that it does us good to do some research and to learn about other people. There are wonderful organizations around, like the Human Rights Campaign, which is a national organization, And they have a great wealth of information on their website to help understand transgender identities and what that means from a medical aspect and a societal aspect and those sorts of things. We also know that it is a very charged conversation in many places around the country because of different bills and things that have been presented. But again, looking at some place like the Human Rights Campaign will help you understand. Reading some books, watching some documentaries, particularly those things that are produced by people from that community and who have the identity of being transgender. There are a number of documentaries that we can watch, or a number of books. I think of Janet Mock, for instance, who is an African-American transgender woman who wrote a memoir that sits on my bookshelf with all the other books that I'm still trying to read. But for me, those are ways that I learn about people and how they present in society. I don't try to change their mind about who they are. I just try to learn, and then I go, but this is another human being. And more often than not, this is the person we see in the grocery store or the gas station. We pass them in the hallway at the courthouse or what have you. And I always ask myself, so what does their identity have to do with what we're doing together? If I'm passing them in the grocery store, we're people who are shopping at the same time. And that is about the extent of our interaction. And that's it, right? And so I think sometimes we get very wound up about people because we don't understand who they are. We have not educated ourselves or sought out information. And we start to try to figure out, well, what does this mean for me? Well, what does it mean for you? And that's a fair question, sure. But once you figure out what it means, it can kind of end there. And I always want to circle back to humanity. It's always about another person. So whether we're talking about someone with a gender identity that's different from us, or someone of a different race of us, or someone of a different socioeconomic status, or someone who has a visible or hidden disability, we're still dealing with people. And I know it sounds very Pollyanna and very naive, but I always want folks to remember to treat people like people, right? Being decent, being kind, that's a major part of inclusion and diversity, is just interacting with a human eye to eye, human to human. Whether you love what they do every day, whether you have absolutely completely different views about everything that happens in their world, whether you will never see each other again, it's still another person. It's still another human.
When you say that, I think of something that it almost like you're saying that don't let your differences be enemy, but more so kind of like don't let discomfort be your enemy, right? If you come across somebody who is different, whatever that difference might be, that don't stop there. That the main thing to always keep in mind is that it's another human being in front of you. And that right there is enough of a bond, or hopefully is enough of a bond where you can start that conversation into whatever issue that might be taking place. What can we do? I mean, this whole program, this whole Activate Diversity series, and we'll come back to this at the end as well. But what can we do just in our kind of daily lives, our daily jobs and so forth to take away that discomfort for these issues? Going back to my buddy's conversation, the one thing that he and I just kept saying to one another is, why is it so hard for so many people, particularly in today's time, where arguably this is probably one of the most polarized times in our nation, which says a lot when you think there was slavery and segregation, all these things, but it does kind of appear that way. How do we break that? And how do we get comfortable enough with discomfort, I would say, so that we can have these conversations?
Mm-hmm. So I will say, one, it takes a lot of deep breathing and pausing. I think sometimes we're so busy and we're rushing through life that we don't stop long enough. And so when something happens or we encounter a person that's different and we get this uncomfortable feeling, we want to bury it. We don't want to deal with it. We want to move on very quickly from that moment. And I say, pause for a minute and sit with yourself and ask yourself, why does this make me uncomfortable? That's the first why. Then the next why I would say is, what motivates you? Why is this even a topic that some of you have tuned in for at 5 o'clock during a busy week? So what is your why of even learning about this? And then I can say there's easier ways to educate ourselves. We're very busy people. And when we start to have these kind of webinars, or we start to talk about learning more about other people, and what that looks like, we start to think of it as, oh my gosh, that's another thing I have to do. It's another activity. My schedule's already packed. How am I supposed to fit this in? We start having like these weird law school flashbacks of never having enough time to get the reading done, right? So I implore you to use your current learning style. And if you don't know what your learning style is, there are some online resources that can help you figure it out. But if you do know what they are, for instance, if you're an auditory learner and you pick up things by hearing very well, maybe that means you should listen to podcasts or audiobooks. And that's something you were probably going to do anyway. Many of us on a Friday or Saturday evening, we sit around with our families or by ourselves or what have you, and we fire up one of those streaming services. We're into Netflix or Hulu or what have you, and we're going to spend, an hour and a half, 2 hours watching something. Maybe in that time, instead of watching another comedy or rewatching that sitcom that you've seen 700 times, maybe use that hour or hour and a half to watch a documentary or even just a movie about, some other culture or some other group of people that you're not familiar with. If you're a person like me who tries to go to an art museum in every possible conceivable city that I visit, maybe that's your entry. If you were going to go to this museum, make sure you visit a specific exhibit or a specific space. So incorporate it into what you're already doing. Living in Ohio, summertime is festival season. And I know that is not exclusive to Ohio, but if you're going to a festival, go to some different festival. We are fortunate that here in Central Ohio, we have, I think it's coming up actually very soon, the Latino Festival. So it focuses on the Latino and Hispanic culture. There's dancing, there's food, there's all types of demonstrations and learning opportunities. We have a Greek Orthodox festival in the fall that I love because I get to have lots of baklava, but also it helps me learn about that community. There's Pride festivals, particularly in June, and then at other points of the year, depending on what city you're in. So use the time that you already have with a hobby or a thing that you were already going to do and just slightly shift your lens just a little bit.
Will that automatically do it though? I mean, because I'm sure there's people on here, particularly lawyers, right, who will say, Jocelyn, Jamie, I have friends of every race. I have gay friends. I have, Jewish friends or Indian friends or whatever it might be, right? And so they're saying to themselves, and I'm not, when I say they, I'm actually including myself too. Hey, I'm pretty well-rounded. I'm pretty diverse. I go to different programs like you just explained. But I just feel differently about this whole diversity thing. Part of it might be, I feel like it's forced, because, we go to trainings like you just mentioned earlier or have certain programs we have to do it. So what would you say to those folks who feel like they kind of get it, but they just either disagree or they get the idea of expanding the horizon in terms of educating themselves, but they still don't necessarily buy into the diversity and inclusion part? Do you have something to say? And that might be a tough question to ask, but what would you say to those folks?
So it's a hard question. And nothing that I'm saying, of course, is a magic bullet, right? What we understand about people and societies is that we evolve. So the more exposure that we get to a thing, the more likely we are to change our thinking and we will embrace it more. Absolutely, when it is a training that someone says you have to do at work, you will feel differently about that. I am not a fan of mandatory trainings. I understand they take place in many spaces, but whenever you put the word mandatory in front of something, people automatically kind of like lean back and they come in the room with a certain sort of attitude because they don't want to be told they have to do a thing, right? So the other thing is, again, the more exposure you have to different types of people, I'm guessing because lawyers tend to be curious by nature, the more we'll want to learn about different types of people, the more we'll want to lean into these kinds of things. And you will start to, I think, feel differently about, also, I would say we also have to look at maybe the programs that we're making people learn, so to speak, or the programs we're making people attend. What are the caliber of the programs? Is it someone at the front of the room talking to them for an hour? Or do they have opportunities to have dialogue like you and I are having, right? And build those connections, because yes, you may have a friend or a neighbor from a different background than you, or a cousin or someone else. But what time are you spending cultivating those relationships and spending time actually interacting with people? That shifts your thinking as well and makes you feel differently about diversity as well. Sharing stories and sharing lived experiences is very important. I tell people, for those folks who are reticent or skeptical about diversity, equity, and inclusion, often when they have a specific experience in their life, be it something that impacted a client or a coworker or a neighbor across the street, that shifts their thinking too. So there's not a one size fits all approach to this. It's figuring out what works best for you and understanding that also this is a long journey. This is not something that you're like, I watched this documentary and now I'm good. I've got it all figured out. I wish it was that easy. It's not, right? Because again, society continues to evolve. People continue to evolve. So we have to continue to have these conversations. And if you think that you're the person who's an expert or you figured it out based upon who your friend group is, awesome. Now you have a new challenge, and that's trying to help other people figure it out.
I like that. And it's funny when we were talking about the word mandatory, and I'll just point everybody to it. This came across me really just before we came on today. I look at, I'm a big Dr. Martin Luther King fan, and I looked at his speech, really it was 1966, his convocation speech in Illinois. I forget which school, maybe I can find, Illinois Wesleyan. And basically that context was about segregation and race and so forth. And he's basically asking, or being asked or commenting on, why are laws and regulations needed in terms of, you can't change somebody's heart. You can't change somebody if they're prejudiced in their heart. That's just how they're going to be. And King has some ingenious response to that. So one, I just bring it up. I think for somebody who's wondering why diversity is important or what may I be missing, take some time to read that. You can pull it up on Google it or whatever and read it. And again, not submitting that you have to agree with it, but I do think he makes some pretty strong points on why there are laws in place, why there are quote unquote mandatory classes in some instances. But I do think, Jocelyn, hit a very big point that, and I've seen it myself in the mandatory things we do, the quality matters, right? And how it's delivered matters. So, I would throw out to our leaders out here in various forms and organizations that, constantly examine the programs that you're doing. Don't look at it as just mandatory. Is it effective? And is it really addressing and encouraging, addressing issues and encouraging dialogue amongst your, your office, amongst your club or whatever. So again, just something I'm just throwing out there. Again, I'm not an expert. Ms. Armstrong is, but just reading some of the things that she prepared, that seems to be some of her messaging. Moving along, we kind of talked about the benefits of diversity. I saw something you wrote, and you wrote something effective. Diversity alone is a great start, but that's not kind of all of it. Elaborate on that. Tell the rest of the group about that.
So when I say diversity alone is a great start, that means, okay, you've got a bunch of different types of people in the room or within your organization. Congratulations. You've done the first step, right? The next thing is considering intentional inclusion. And I'm very clear about saying intentional on the beginning of that and using that as the modifier, because being intentional in our inclusion efforts. So we say, for instance, in the legal profession, we can't seem to find diverse talent. The women they come here and then they leave. And they want to go to in-house jobs instead of staying at the firm or that sort of thing. And so the question becomes, what culture are we asking people to come into to work? So it's great that we can, build diversity, but if we do not make it a place where people actually want to stay and develop professionally and personally, that's very hard. So intentional inclusion looks like pay equity. Intentional inclusion looks like having good leave policies for everybody. I was just with a group of people recently. We were talking about maternity leave versus paternity leave. And I said, well, let's talk about parental leave, because some people may be adopting children or they may happen upon kids in their family and they have to take them in and now they need leave time, right? So what does parental leave look like? That's a very inclusive sort of thing. Are we making our offices spaces where people can move around regardless of their mobility? Are we complying with ADA requirements, but in a humane way? So yes, we'll make sure that you have a modified desk. Of course, you'll get access to, talk to text speech software so that you can use your Word documents. But are we embracing those folks and providing those accommodations in a way that is kind and with dignity, right? And not trying to make it seem like it's a bother or that they can't do the work just because they need accommodations. Those are all things that we have to think about when we're talking about inclusion and being intentionally inclusive. And then we have to talk about, what does equity mean? I like to use the example, people often confuse equity and equality. They're not the same. And equity does not mean that somebody's getting, some sort of head start or something. They're getting what they need to get the thing done. So my best example of equity is I am 5'3". I know we can't tell on Zoom. I know that I seem taller. I'm not 5'3". My brother is 6'2". And equality says my brother and I both get the same pair of pants. This is problematic because either I'm going to be walking on fabric or his ankles will be freezing, right? Equity says you both get a pair of pants, but in your actual size. And that's not anything bad. That just means you're getting the thing that you need, right? I know that's a very silly example, but that's a thing that sticks with people when you think about equity versus equality. And so when we're talking about equity in workspaces, again, maybe there's a person who is neurodivergent and they are going to do a wonderful job, but they need a couple of extra minutes or hours to get that job done. They're going to finish writing the brief, but you can't give them a brief the night before and expect to have it at 8 o'clock in the morning. You need to give them a little more lead time. Does that mean their work is not excellent? Absolutely not. It just means that because they're neurodivergent, they have to approach it in a different way. And it's going to take a little more time. And that's okay. So we have to move beyond just saying, hey, we're diverse and it's great. We've got all the different people in the room. How are the different people being received in the room? What are we doing to make sure that they want to be in the room and they feel like they belong in the room?
Yeah, let's talk about belonging a little bit. That's another point. How do you do that? How do you make somebody belong?
So belonging is a very interesting phrase that's being bandied about. And belonging is basically making sure that someone feels like they fit in a space and that their ideas are valued and that their contributions are valued. And we have to understand that belonging looks different to some people, because for some people, showing up to the workplace or showing up to the bar association event means they want to come, they want to learn, and they want to leave, but they know they have an opportunity to fill out a survey, or they know they have an opportunity to ask questions. And for them, that is belonging. For others, belonging looks like I want to come, I want to be on the panel, I need to be a part of the planning committee, right? Again, making sure that people have the ability to know that their opinion is valued, know that their input is valued, know that their contributions are valued. That is belonging at its core. You can't make people feel like they fit or belong, though. You have to set the stage in order to let them know that it is something that does exist, that it is available. So when you're looking at an organization, some places do employee surveys or they have suggestion boxes and they open these up to everyone. So it's not just, the C-suite and above or middle management and above making decisions. Those are ways. There's a car factory here in Ohio, and I think they're a good example of belonging in that. One, everyone wears the same outfit, whether you're in corporate or whether you're working on the line, you wear the same uniform. But also anyone in that organization can submit ideas to the engineers to make the process better, or to make something more efficient, if you will. And the ideas received from the brand new person who's only been working on the line 6 months to the person who's in upper management are all received in the same way, and they go through the same vetting process. That is a great example to me of belonging, because again, everyone knows that their input and their contributions are valued by the organization.
So to unpack that a little more, are you saying that there's nothing wrong with kind of like a standard, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so please correct me. It's okay for everybody to go through certain things, certain standards, whether it's like the bar exam, whether it's like, whatever, same uniform, that's okay. But that isn't mutually exclusive or opposite or in disagreement with diversity. You can have both. Is that fair to say? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, because like for the example I gave of the car factory, the reason that it's a Japanese model. So the reason that they do that is because if we're all wearing the same uniform, that makes us better able to collaborate, because we're not looking at this in a hierarchical way, even though we know that we're different spaces on the org chart. This is the kind of the thing that levels us out, so to speak. But everyone in those uniforms is different and they're bringing different things to the table. They just happen to have on the same clothes.
Okay. Is there anything I didn't kind of bring up or that you like to, because I want to go into the questions just in case people do have to leave. Is there anything, again, you study this, you experience this in your job. And by the way, she has a podcast. I didn't mention that in the introduction. So please catch her podcast. I'm sure I get the right name of it. It is, well, go ahead, Jocelyn. I can't remember the official. Oh, there it is. Go ahead.
Inscribing inclusion. So that's a hobby that I do outside of my work hours. I will say this though, you all have called me an expert, and I think that's fun. Truthfully though, I am always constantly learning, right? What I will tell you about this diversity, equity, and inclusion journey is that it does not stop at a certain point. There is no like ultimate level of achievement. There are people that I admire and look up to and learn from in this field. And there are people that I hope that I am teaching and help learn things that are coming up behind me. I look at it much like I do the practice of law, right? Even when you get to the highest of heights, there's still a new thing that happens because a law changes, and you may have been practicing for 40 years and now something shifts in your particular practice area, and you are still very well experienced, but you might be novice in that thing. So I'm constantly learning, and I encourage you all to constantly learn too at whatever place that you're on your journey. Um, I will say that I want us to again remember that a lot of this is about humanity. And I know there was a question that came up in the chat box, and I want to read it because it's important, and I want to get to it. When speaking about diversity and inclusion, I often ask folks how political views interfere with acceptance and true inclusion. The question asker asks, I use the example of whether in selecting a leader in a committee or presentation, if they would include a person who identifies as African American or Black, but who is perhaps pro-life, over a Caucasian male who is pro-choice. And so then they asked that I would speak to how we have those difficult discussions of inclusion, particularly around political perspectives. This is hard. I will not pretend like that is an easy thing to do. But what I can tell you is that when we're talking about how political ideologies fit into this conversation, we have to remember that we live in a place where that is a large part of our society and how people's thinking is shaped. And so when we immediately put a label on it, though, is like someone has a certain race, or someone is affiliated with a particular party or a particular set of political ideas, we automatically then in our brain have decided what they're going to say to us, what their thinking is, how they're going to approach a thing. And that's where our implicit bias creeps in, right? Because if I say pro-choice or pro-life, you automatically have an idea in your mind about what that person's going to do and how they're going to do something. And that may not be completely accurate. It's a little more nuanced than that, right? And I feel like that's a part that we've missed in society, is that we don't have nuanced conversations anymore. We don't allow for there to be various shades of gray in the things that we're dealing with. So I will not pretend like it's easy, but what I will say, I will encourage people to interrupt their bias. So when they hear a particular racial or ethnic identity, or they hear a particular political, like someone has a particular political persuasion, I will encourage them to pause for a minute and kind of slow down all the things that are immediately bombarding their brain about what they think this person might do or say, and instead have a one-on-one conversation with that person and say, I understand that your political ideology is thus. Can you tell me more about what that means for you? I'd love to talk about how you arrived there. Maybe there are some things that we actually think the same about, despite possibly being on what we would consider opposite ends of a spectrum, right? But it takes us disrupting our own biases in our brain. It takes us slowing down long enough to have the conversation. It takes us being comfortable with dealing with nuance and understanding that everything is not 100% one way or the other. And we also have to be okay with the fact that sometimes we will encounter people who do not agree with us 100%. And we can still have a conversation with them. And as long as it's not dangerous and they're not violent towards you and no one is being hurt, you can still have a conversation, and you may walk away and have learned something different. Or you may walk away and decide, I still don't agree with their point of view, but I'm glad I figured out where they were coming from.
And what you said too, it kind of rings with me. It's not enough just to have friends or be in certain circles, but you do have to, at some point, have, to use your word again, and that intentional conversation. And I'm not suggesting, maybe I'm wrong, you can guide me otherwise. I'm not saying in the middle of a party, you just say, hey, let's talk about politics or something like that. But when the opportunity arises, if you really want to have a breakthrough, and I think the breakthroughs go both ways, because I'll go back to my conversation with my buddy. It's still playing in my head, different things that were said. And while I think we both walked away, there's some things we probably won't agree on, it definitely has made me, think about things a little bit and actually be more empathetic, actually. Because while I may not agree, going back to the target comment I made earlier, I can understand it. Whether I agree with it or not is different, but I can understand where somebody would come from and why they would have those type of thoughts and feelings. And they're legitimate, right? They're the legitimate feelings. And so, but somehow we got to get through it. Somehow we have to have a breakthrough so that we can sit, at the coffee table or at the bar or wherever it might be, and go back to like what you said earlier. And I think it's very important just to be human with one another. And that, to me, that's the only way we're gonna get through this polarization. I'm gonna turn it over. Kelly, I think there's some question in there. I'll leave it at that unless there's anything else you want to add before we go to the questions, Jocelyn.
No, I'm ready for the questions. I know I grabbed one. I jumped.
Yeah, I know you grabbed one. I don't know if there's any more there.
It looks like
Anybody
they're
else?
mostly just comments on how wonderful this discussion has been, that Jocelyn is a hero. But I don't see any questions. So if anyone has any questions, now is the time. You can put it in the question and answer, and we will read them out and give it over to Jamie and Jocelyn.
I did think of another thing, of course, as Kelly said, that I would be remiss if I did
On a
not
second,
mention
oh, sure.
in the ABA magazine, and I will have to send it to Steve and Kimberly and company to share with the folks in the division. But there was I had the opportunity to be interviewed by the ABA magazine, and we were talking about how to have and handle diversity, equity, and inclusion in homogenous communities. So that is something that I definitely want to share with you all. I would also be remiss if I did not mention that the Ohio State Bar Association has a wonderful program called the Equity Education Series. It's currently on summer break. Season 4 starts in November, but we have 3 seasons available on demand that have actually been approved, at least by our state Supreme Court, for continuing legal education credit. And I would certainly encourage you all to check those conversations out as well. Some of them feature me, many of them are discussions that I curated with other speakers.
One housekeeping note, I'm not sure if we said it out loud earlier, but our co-sponsors, and if I did, I just want to reiterate that, the ABA Commission on Disability Rights, ABA Commission on Hispanic Legal Rights and Responsibilities, and the ABA Commission on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity. So this was a group effort. I'll give a few more minutes. We got down with about 5 more minutes left. Any other questions or even comments? Welcome any comments.
There
from
is a
anybody.
question.
Oh, sorry.
There's a question. There's a question. There's a lot of criticism of DEI training. How do you respond to this? Can you describe what you think is a good training approach?
So I tend to, and I say this with some of our board members sitting on the call, I saw their names in the boxes. I tend to take what I call the very educational approach of, I call it, I used to watch Nick at Night, so bear with me. I think it was Dragnet, where they used to say just the facts, nothing but the facts. That's how I tend to approach it. One is giving people the information, right? And properly vetting the sources and making sure you have good trainers, but giving people the information. I like to help people understand different facets of life, and point them into the direction of resources. I don't ever try to come into a situation and say, like, let's just point around the room and just say, you're ableist, or you're misogynist, or you're an ageist, or like, no one wants to talk then if you just go in the room and like label people, flip a table, and now we're done. But how can we say, hey, listen, let's talk about, the generations and how they approach things, and what does generational diversity mean in your workplace, right? And let's talk about the different behaviors of the generations, if you will, and the events that shape their coming of age, and so how they show up in the workplace. And now let's break into groups and figure out how we can work across the generations to have the most successful result, right? That's a different example. Or we can talk about learning more about neurodivergence, because we think about disability and we only think about the things that we can see, right? Someone's in a wheelchair, someone has a walker, someone is an amputee. But what about people who have ADHD or who are on the autism spectrum and they're our coworkers, right? What do we need to learn about that? And then we can talk about how we can cultivate these great workplaces where people can show up with all their different learning styles and all their different, even hidden disabilities, and get work done, right? Those are some of the things. So it has to be conversational. It has to not be accusatory. It has to be facts-based, Nothing but the facts. I even believe that we would do ourselves great service of bringing in other professionals to help us learn some of these things. So when we want to talk about disability, we need to, one, listen to people in the disability community because it's their lived experience, but two, bring in a doctor or bring in a licensed therapist or some other mental health professional to help us learn. We can't be the only people in the room teaching ourselves.
And you know, you just said something also. I mean, you said a lot of things that obviously it's hit me, but you said listen to people. To me, that implies there has to be a certain level of trust. So let me give you an example. Let's say George Floyd. All right, and this is a little deeper conversation, but another conversation I had actually. And we know that there's people out there who say, well, George Floyd was doing something illegal. And the umpteen other African-American men who've been shot over the years, and women, let me be clear on that, and women. The question I want to pose, and I don't know if there's really an answer for your question for you, Jocelyn, is just kind of for us to kind of ponder a little bit, is we don't know I don't know what it's like to walk in your shoes as a woman, right? And then you add layers, Black woman, somebody might be disabled, like you said, or gay or whatever. And so it occurs to me that we're gonna have to trust people when they tell them, when other people tell us, this is our experience, right? So I can't really, you know, to somebody, you know, we've gone through a spell of Asian hate recently. I couldn't speak to what it's like to be Asian in America, you know, particularly, you know, about a year ago when there was all those killings and attacks and so forth. I can only speak to my experience as a Black man who's a veteran in the military, Black man who happens to be a lawyer, the son of a Baptist preacher, and all these things. I find myself sometimes saying, look, there's plenty of research out there that kind of supports a lot of things, but at the end of the day, I kind of feel like, hey, trust me, you know, if you think I'm a credible person and I'm having these conversations with people that I think I'm credible, then I think it's upon each one of us to just trust that person, what they're saying. And that doesn't mean you agree with it, doesn't mean it's always 100%, but if I'm telling you my experience as a Black man in this country, then hopefully if you're white, Asian, or whatever you might be, that you can trust what I'm saying is truthful, right? Or at least to my experience is truthful. And I think we tend to make that mistake, right? That we're always doubting, or we don't take the time to really listen to what somebody's saying. And so maybe you do see, you know, let's go to the meritocracy versus, you know, programming, you know, diversity, whatever, right, aspect. I can tell you, yes, I've done well in school, but I also can tell you I had experiences of being pulled over. I've had experiences of being treated differently, and I can trace it back to race. And even though now, if you're looking at me, some would say, oh, you've been successful, and clearly that wasn't a problem. Well, it really was. Just because I'm in this space now doesn't mean I didn't have hurdles that were directly related to my race or to my, you know, my culture, whatever. And so I feel like one of the things that we also have to do a better job is just when somebody says something to you, it's listening, but it's also trusting what they're saying. And then adding all the other stuff, the research or whatever, to kind of come to some conclusion, which everybody's entitled to their own conclusion. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but that's just kind of something just kind of popped in my head as you were talking.
Sometimes because a thing did not happen to us, it's hard for us to believe it, because we immediately start to filter it through our experiences and how it would happen to us if it did. So you're right, particularly when you're talking to someone that you have some sort of relationship with, you should trust them anyway. And so yes, trust and believe what they're saying. And then you can possibly draw a corollary. So you talked about, you know, being a Black man in America, but then also understanding that there were people of Asian descent who were being attacked in certain spaces. And the common thing there is that violence was being perpetrated against people based on their visible identities. And that makes people who share those visible identities afraid. And so while you as a Black man are not an Asian elder, for instance, in California, you can understand that dynamic of fear of I'm in a space and someone sees me and I look a certain way, and they've decided that that's a reason that they want to be violent against me. And then the reverse is true, of course, right? Even though that Asian elder, for instance, does not understand what it means to be a Black man in America, they do understand, again, that someone has perpetrated violence against this person. because they've decided that this is the thing they're going to do. And so that is a commonality, sadly, that then you share, but that helps kind of understand, kind of deepens your empathy and kind of helps you understand a little more. But that is, again, why it's important for us to move outside of our bubbles and engage with people who do not share our identities, because we will start to figure out, again, dealing with human beings, that there are some things, and I would like to say even some really good things that we have in common that we can lean into as well. And we start to realize that we're not always as different as we think. And that when we are talking about our differences, those are things to be celebrated. Those are things to be excited about, right? And not things that should keep us apart.
While speaking of differences, Jocelyn, there's a
With that
question.
said- oh, sorry.
Oh,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, Jamie. There's a question.
No, go
and a
ahead. No, go ahead.
comment.
I was gonna say, go ahead, Kelly.
Okay, coming from Joanne Leaston. Why can't people be accepted on merits instead of their differences? I mean, people should not be hired for any reason other than merit. What are your thoughts on that? I know that that is a common claim that people made, especially in the wake of our Supreme Court decision on affirmative action.
Why can't they be? Right. I would love it if people were just able to be who they were and show up in spaces and get hired or get admitted to school or advance in their profession and in their career. But for some reason, society has been set up in these systems that folks have decided that other people are not as human as them or as qualified as them or whatever the case may be. So that's us, I think, individually kind of thinking about how we deal with people, and acknowledging the fact that we are still trying to undo some history and some things in our society that relegated folks to different places. When we think about immigration, either by choice or by force, right? Folks moved here and they were put in a certain stratus, and we decided that we had a hierarchy. And so then people are still trying to undo and come up from that. And so we have to acknowledge that that is a thing. And so until we start to deal with that and kind of try to undo some of the things that were done in history, you know, women had to actually march for the right to vote, right? And these sorts of things. When we start to kind of undo some of that stuff and deal with that, and the trailing sort of issues that come with that, then we can maybe get to the place where people can just get what they get based on merit.
Anything else, Kelly?
There are no questions right now. Thank you.
All right, and now I'll point you back to that question and comment. I would point you back to what I was saying earlier, Dr. King's convocation speech on that. Look it up, 1966, and I think he kind of addresses that point, that merit versus programmatic schemes and so forth. With that said, since I don't see any more questions, Jocelyn Armstrong, I just want to thank you for your thoughts and for your time and what you do at the Ohio Bar. This is incredible. I hope you all learned from it. I want to thank all for attending and to the staff who helped Activate Diversity series. But we'll be back. So we'll be back next year with several more. And in the tradition of our program, I'm going to end this last thing. Jocelyn, even you kind of talked about it for the last hour. How do you plan to activate diversity in your personal space going forward?
I plan to activate diversity by, one, continuing to teach myself and learn as much as I can about other people, and then using what I learn to help other people along on their journey.
It works for me. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.